For 30 years, he'd sold hammers, nails, and paint to the folks around Fort Campbell. Just another friendly hardware store owner with calloused hands and a warm smile. Customers noticed his missing fingers but never asked, until a young veteran spotted something dusty behind the tool display that made his blood run cold. Hidden behind decades of inventory was a Medal of Honor certificate, and suddenly everyone realized they'd been served by America's most humble war hero. Welcome to Everyday Legends. Before we continue this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Because sometimes the greatest heroes work in the most ordinary places. Pete's Hardware sat just outside Fort Campbell, right on Main Street. From the outside, it looked like any typical small-town hardware store. Faded green paint on the sign, vintage hand tools displayed in the window, and a door that was always open. But when you walked inside, you realized this wasn't just a store. This was a community center. Pete Harrison was 72 years old and had been running this store for 40 years. Medium height, silver hair, always wearing a clean shirt. His eyes always smiled. His voice was always kind. But the first thing customers noticed about Pete was his hands. His left hand was missing the index finger, and his right hand was missing the ring and pinky fingers. Nobody ever asked about it. Small towns have rules. A man's past belongs to him. But everyone wondered. Factory accident? Farm machinery mishap? Pete never offered explanations, and no one pressed. Pete's store was a favorite spot for Fort Campbell soldiers, barracks repairs, personal projects, hobby work. Whatever they needed, Pete had it. And for things he didn't have, Pete would say, "I'll have it by Thursday, I'll set you up." And he always kept his word. The store itself was like a maze, narrow corridors, shelves stacked to the ceiling, toolboxes crammed into corners. Everything looked a bit old, a bit dusty, but Pete knew where everything was. "Second aisle, left shelf, red box," he'd say, never missing a beat. Pete's relationship with customers was special. He didn't just make sales, he solved problems. If a young soldier said, "My door squeaks," Pete wouldn't just sell oil. He'd explain which hinge was the problem, how to fix it, and how to prevent it in the future. And there were always stories. Pete's stories were legendary. But strangely, none of his stories were from his military days. Always store stories, customer stories, town stories, as if his life had begun at 40 when he took over the store. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams had been stationed at Fort Campbell for 2 years and was a regular at Pete's store. Williams loved mechanical work and spent his free time restoring an old motorcycle. Pete always found the right part, gave the right advice. That Saturday, Williams needed a special wrench set. He was searching in the tool section at the back of the store. Pete was busy with another customer at the register. Williams couldn't find the wrenches he was looking for. He needed to look deeper. While trying to move an old toolbox, the box slipped and fell. Tools scattered everywhere. "Ah, damn," Williams muttered, starting to gather the scattered tools. Pete finished with his customer and rushed over. "No problem, Williams," he said. "I'll clean this up." But Williams had seen something. At the bottom of the fallen toolbox, covered with old newspapers, was something that made his breath catch. There, under the newspapers covered in dust, was a frame. Inside was an official document, a Medal of Honor certificate, America's highest military decoration, and the name Peter J. Harrison. Williams froze. In his hands was the certificate for America's highest military medal, and it belonged to Pete. "Williams, is something wrong?" Pete approached, and when he saw the certificate, his face went white. "Pete ... Williams's voice wouldn't come. Is this yours?" Pete quietly took the certificate from Williams's hands, wrapped it in the old newspapers, and put it back in the toolbox. "Old stuff," he said simply. "Not important." "Not important?" Williams couldn't believe it. Pete, this is the Medal of Honor, America's highest military award. Pete looked around, worried other customers might hear, and lowered his voice. Williams, please, let's not talk about this. But Pete, you're a war hero. No, I'm not. I'm a hardware store owner. Williams was confused. Pete, how did you earn this medal? Pete remained silent for a long time. Then he said, long story, and not worth telling. I think it is. Pete looked at the customers. The store wasn't empty. Not now. Tonight after the store closes. Williams nodded. Okay, but we're having this conversation. That evening, after Pete closed the store, Williams came back. Pete was sitting in the back room, drinking a cup of coffee. Sit down, Pete said. Let me make you some coffee. Williams sat. Pete, what I saw today, I never expected it. Nobody expects it, because nobody knows. Why? Why do you hide it? Pete sipped his coffee. Because that person isn't me anymore. What do you mean? Pete took a deep breath. Williams, what do you know about Vietnam? What I've read in books, seen in movies. Reality was very different. Very, very different. Pete got up and brought an old box from the back of the store. Inside were photographs, letters, military documents. This is me, he said, showing an old photograph. 1968, Vietnam, 22 years old. In the photo was a young soldier, fit, confident, a warrior with fire in his eyes. Williams barely recognized him. This was Pete, but a very different Pete. Which unit? Williams asked. 1st Infantry Division. They called us the Big Red One. What did you do there? Pete's face darkened. I fought, tried to stay alive, tried to protect my friends. How did you earn the Medal of Honor? Pete was silent for a long time. Then he began to tell the story. March 1969. We were on patrol in the Mekong Delta, 22-man squad. Started as a routine mission, but nothing was routine in Vietnam. Pete stopped, painful memories returning. We walked into an ambush, coordinated attack, fire from every direction. Most of us couldn't find cover. Sniper fire, mortar rounds, automatic weapons, hell broke loose. Williams listened silently. Squad leader died in the first minute. Radio man was wounded. Communication was cut. And I was the most inexperienced man there. What did you do? Went into survival mode, but I realized that even if I lived, my squad would die, because there was no organized resistance. Pete looked at the photographs. I made a decision, an impossible decision. To move the squad to a safe position, I had to draw enemy fire to myself. Williams's heart raced. Alone, I had to assault 3 different enemy positions, machine gun nests, sniper positions. Death seemed certain, but the alternative was the squad's death. How did you survive? Pete showed his hands. I didn't, not completely. Williams noticed the missing fingers. Grenade explosion. My left hand was destroyed, but I continued because my friends were still under fire. How long did it last? 3 hours. 3 hours alone, neutralizing multiple enemy positions, while wounded with ammunition running out. Williams was amazed. When I eliminated the last enemy position, I lost consciousness from blood loss. Next thing I remember was the medevac helicopter. What happened to your squad? Pete smiled, a real smile for the first time. All alive. 21 Marines, alive and safe, because I diverted the enemy fire. Incredible. Number, it was desperate, and there was a cost. Pete showed his right hand. Shrapnel damage, 2 fingers amputated, permanent motor skills damage. And he stopped. And PTSD, survivor guilt, nightmares, years of therapy. Williams was beginning to understand. That's why you left the military. The military declared me a hero. Medal ceremony, publicity, interviews. But I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a broken man. What did you do? Disappeared. got a medical discharge from the military, came here, took over my father's store, and never told anyone about my past. Why? Pete thought for a long time. Because that war changed me. The man who was a hero died in Vietnam. I'm just the surviving pieces. Williams objected. Pete, you are a hero. You saved 17 Marines. Yes, but at what cost? Look at these hands. Look at this old man. There was a hero in Vietnam. Here there's just a damaged veteran. But you're still serving. With this store, to this community. Pete was surprised. What do you mean? Pete, you help young soldiers every day. You give tools, advice, mentorship, in a different uniform, but you're still serving. Pete had never considered this. I just do my job. Number. You're the backbone of this community. Every soldier feels welcome here, feels respected. You care about them. Pete's eyes filled with tears. Williams, I've seen myself as a failure for so long. War destroyed me. But maybe you found a new purpose. Pete nodded. Maybe. In the weeks that followed, Williams began looking at Pete with different eyes, no longer just a friendly hardware store owner, but a veteran who deserved respect. Gradually, Williams started dropping subtle hints to other soldiers, not directly, but clues about Pete's background. One day, young Private Johnson came to the store, frustrated. Mr. Pete, I can't adapt to military life. I'm thinking about quitting. Pete stopped and looked at Johnson. He saw something of himself in the young man. Johnson, sit down. Let me tell you something. Yes, sir. Military life isn't easy. It never was. But quitting isn't the solution. But I'm weak. I'm not strong like the others. Pete smiled. Johnson, strength comes in different types. Physical strength, mental strength, moral strength. Which type do you think you're weak in? All of them. Wrong. You came here, shared your problem, asked for help. That requires moral courage. Johnson was listening. I once felt weak too, in war, under pressure, facing impossible decisions. But I realized that admitting weakness is the beginning of strength. Really? Really. And the most important thing, you have brothers, military family. They'll support you and you'll support them. Johnson nodded. Thank you, Mr. Pete. Anytime, son. These types of conversations became frequent. Pete gradually began becoming an informal mentor to soldiers. Without sharing his war experiences, he was transferring life lessons. And slowly, word spread. Pete's wisdom, guidance, respect. Soldiers started visiting the store, not just for supplies, but for conversation. One evening, Colonel Martinez came to the store, senior officer, multiple deployments, respected leader. Mr. Harrison, I need to speak with you. Pete was concerned. Is there a problem, Colonel? Opposite. My soldiers speak very highly of you. They say you provide valuable guidance. Pete was humble. Just try to help when I can. Some of them mentioned you have military background. Dangerous territory. Long time ago, sir. Martinez studied Pete carefully. What branch? Army, sir. Vietnam era. Combat? Pete hesitated. Yes, sir. Martinez nodded respectfully. Thank you for your service, and thank you for continuing to serve our young soldiers. My pleasure, sir. But Martinez wasn't finished. Mr. Harrison, we have young soldiers struggling with various issues: adaptation, homesickness, confidence. Would you consider a more formal mentorship role? Pete was surprised. Sir? Nothing official, just being available when they need guidance from someone who's been there. Pete considered. I'd be honored, sir. Months passed. Pete's role in the community gradually evolved, still a hardware store owner, but also an unofficial counselor for young soldiers. And with this new purpose, Pete began healing. Old wounds, emotional scars, survivor guilt. Helping others helped him find peace. One day, Williams approached Pete with a serious expression. Pete, I have something to ask you. Sure. There's a Veterans Day ceremony next month. The base commander wants to honor local veterans. Pete was uncomfortable. Williams, they want to honor you specifically. Someone mentioned your Medal of Honor. Pete panicked. Williams, no, I don't want publicity. Not publicity, just recognition from the community you've served. I can't. Too many questions, too much attention. Williams understood. What if the ceremony was small? Just local soldiers, no media, no fanfare. Pete considered. How small? Just the soldiers you've helped, the ones whose lives you've touched. Pete thought about Johnson, about Martinez, about dozens of young soldiers he'd guided. They really want this. They do. You've impacted their lives, Pete. They want to say thank you. Pete sighed. Okay, but small. Very small. The Veterans Day ceremony was held in the hardware store after hours. About 30 people, soldiers Pete had helped, their families, a few local veterans. No speeches, no formal presentations. Just a gathering of people whose lives had been touched by quiet service. Colonel Martinez said a few words. Pete Harrison served his country in war and continues serving in peace. His hardware store is more than a business. It's a sanctuary for young soldiers finding their way. Pete stood quietly, overwhelmed by emotion. These people, his people, had gathered to honor him, not for past heroism, but for present service. Young Johnson approached Pete with a small gift. Mr. Pete, this is from all of us. Pete opened it. Inside was a simple plaque. Pete Harrison, our hardware hero. Thank you for fixing more than just tools. Pete's eyes filled with tears. Thank you all. This means everything. Later, after everyone left, Williams stayed to help clean up. How do you feel? Williams asked. Different, Pete replied. Good different. You realize what happened tonight? What? You found your new mission, different from Vietnam, but just as important. Pete nodded. Helping young warriors find their way. Exactly. Pete, you didn't stop being a hero after Vietnam. You just found a new way to be one. Years passed. Pete continued running the hardware store, continued mentoring young soldiers. His impact grew quietly, steadily. Some soldiers he'd helped became sergeants, lieutenants, captains. They'd return to thank him, bring their own soldiers to meet him. Pete's health declined as he approached 80. Arthritis made work difficult, but he refused to retire. This is my post, he'd tell Williams. I don't abandon my post. Williams, now a sergeant major, organized soldiers to help Pete. They'd assist with inventory, heavy lifting, store maintenance. The hardware store became more than a business. It became an institution, a place where experience met innocence, where wisdom was shared, where service continued beyond official duty. Pete passed away peacefully at age 83. His funeral was attended by hundreds, soldiers past and present, community members, friends whose lives he'd touched. Colonel Martinez, now a general, delivered the eulogy. Pete Harrison proved that service never ends. In war, he saved lives through courage. In peace, he saved lives through compassion. His hardware store was a classroom where young soldiers learned that strength comes not from weapons, but from wisdom. The store was purchased by a group of veterans and turned into a memorial community center. Pete's Place, where service continues. Above the entrance, they hung Pete's Medal of Honor certificate, no longer hidden behind paint cans. Next to it, hundreds of photos showing Pete with soldiers he had helped over the decades, 2 displays, one showing the moment of extraordinary courage in a Vietnamese jungle, the other showing a lifetime of quiet service in a small-town hardware store. Pete Harrison proved that heroism isn't just about a single moment of battlefield courage. Sometimes it's about decades of showing up, helping others, sharing wisdom earned through sacrifice. His missing fingers told the story of a moment when he chose others' lives over his own safety. His gentle guidance told the story of a man who chose to heal others rather than remain broken himself. In the end, Pete Harrison showed that real heroes don't retire. They just find new ways to serve. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in quiet conversations between an old veteran and a young soldier who needed to hear that weakness isn't failure, that asking for help takes courage, and that every warrior, past, present, and future, has value. Pete Harrison, Medal of Honor, recipient, hardware store owner, mentor to hundreds. A man who learned that heroism comes in many forms and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with wisdom, patience, and an unending willingness to serve others. His legacy lived on in every soldier he'd guided, every life he'd touched, every moment when experience met innocence and showed the way forward. So tell us, have you ever met someone humble whose hidden past revealed extraordinary courage? Someone who served quietly without seeking recognition? Share their story in the comments. If this story touched you, subscribe and share. Because people like Pete Harrison are everywhere, serving in small ways that make big differences, proving that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear work aprons and have calloused hands, and they change the world one conversation at a time. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest heroes work behind counters, not on battlefields. Sometimes the most important service happens in the quiet moments when one person chooses to help another find their way.